Welcome back, boxing fans, to the recap. Now is my evening, so now I can have a beer. Uh, so obviously today we had a good fight card from the zone. Um, Obviously there's some repercussions based on the fights that we had, and we're going to be talking about those repercussions more really than the fights themselves. As far as the fights, we saw them, we lived it, we loved it, and now we're moving on. Obviously, Oscar Collazo defended his WBO minimum weight title in impressive fashion, scoring an impressive knockout victory. We also had Jaime Munguia doing the unthinkable, stopping John Ryder in 9 rounds, as I predicted. So that's a prediction. Check. Perfect. So that was a fantastic performance by both of these fighters. Obviously, Collazo, a Puerto Rican world champion at 105 pounds, not one of the divisions that gets much attention in the boxing world. And so I'm happy to see that he is a Golden Boy fighter and he was put on this card because it gave people in the States primarily a big opportunity to see a small weight fighter and how exciting they can be. He put on a great performance, got rid of that guy in impressive fashion. Even though he's only 105 pounds, he showed speed, power, and great technique in defending his title. And I look forward to him fighting one of the other champions in unification this year in 2024. Obviously, we have CP Freshmart, the long-reigning Thai champion. And then we have the two Shinyoko brothers, who obviously are two champions at that weight class as well. Not very often we get two brothers that are world champions in the same division at the same time. Obviously, we had the Charlos at 154. We had the Klitschko's at the heavyweight division. And now we have Shioka brothers at 105 pounds. And I would love to see one of the Shioka brothers versus Collazo. That would be great. The real excellent thing about having, a Puerto Rican world champion at 105 pounds who's part of Golden Boy. So, of course, every time Golden Boy puts on a big card, you know Collazo is probably going to be somewhere on that card defending his world title. So that's great because he's going to get a lot more opportunity to showcase himself with American audiences. But secondly, what's great is obviously he speaks English fluently. So because he's able to speak English fluently, he's a lot more marketable in the States. We also have Bam Rodriguez, who just unified titles at 112 pounds, also being a Mexican-American who speaks English fluently. And by having these small weight fighters that American audiences can relate to, because obviously, they can speak to you in your own language, so it's a lot easier to, feel some sort of connection to both of them. And obviously, Collazo, Oscar, I don't know so much about him, but we know many Puerto Ricans are based in New York City. I'm not sure if he is a New York-based Puerto Rican or not, but obviously, we know somewhere down the line, that's going to be a potential hotspot for him to build his fan base, the Puerto Rican New Yorker fan base in the States. So don't be surprised if he's back in the ring this June for Puerto Rico celebrations. As I said, and I will be saying moving forward in this video, another potential fight I would love to see on the Puerto Rican holiday in New York City as well. But Collazo definitely should be on that undercard. Currently, he did call out the other world champions, but let's just look to see exactly what obligations he may have in front of him, because obviously being a world champion, he may need to defend against his mandatory. That is something that is normal in boxing. Boxing scenes rankings. The good thing about the WBO is they're pretty legitimate as far as when they mandate fights and their openness to work with the fighter to fight for unification and things of that nature. So I'm sure that if he's able to make a unification fight with one of the other champions, they'd be more than happy to sort of step aside and allow him to defend his titles in that situation. his three potential opponents are all Asian, obviously two Japanese fighters and one Thai fighter. So the likelihood of bringing them over to the States, maybe it would be more prone to be the Thai fighter looking for a career-defining payday. Obviously, the Japanese fighters have a strong fan base in Japan, culturally and language-wise. Japanese people, I don't know if they're as keen to travel abroad to defend their titles, just because obviously for them it's a lot more culture shock involved. So, that is also something to pay attention to. Why I stick this thing in, and it says that I'm short on batteries, even though I got my little battery pack. So let's scroll down and look at minimum weight, current rankings and who potentially we could see as a potential opponent for him. So currently Oscar Collazo, he just fought today Reyneses Gutierrez, who was the number 10 ranked WBO fighter. Currently, Luis Castillo is the number 1 ranked WBO mandatory. Luis Castillo. So let's look at BoxRec for a second and just see something about this Mr. Luis Castillo. I'm curious where he's ranked as far as the BoxRec overall rankings. Not to say BoxRec is the most dependable, but they are what they are. Oh, Hans Boy is number 6. That's nice. Alex Winwood, the Australian, who beat the guy that was an opponent today. There he is, Luis Castillo, Mexican. So right there, the potential for having that fight in June, that's a potentially big fight. Mexican versus Puerto Rican. Puerto Rican holiday, New York City. That's a fight that could make a lot of sense. Here is Luis Castillo, obviously a veteran fighter, 21 wins, no losses, 1 draw, 13 knockouts and 21 wins, not bad. He is 26 years of age, southpaw, 66-inch reach. When we look at the last few fights that he has, his last 2 opponents are highly ranked guys with good records, 28-3, 22, 6-5, and obviously based on these opponents, it catapulted him into this mandatory position. I wouldn't mind that fight at all, especially for June. Collazo, for his part, obviously now he moves to 9-0 with 7 KOs. He is 27 years old, 61-inch reach. So he'd be giving up 5 inches of reach to the taller and longer Mexican fighter. And that would be a very intriguing fight. So that's potentially what we could see from Collazo, most likely. The likelihood of him getting one of the Asian fighters so quickly, I think it's probably unlikely. But considering that no other American promoter is involved with the Thai fighter or the 2 Japanese fighters, that shouldn't be a hurdle, right? The boxing politics shouldn't necessarily get in the way of unification. It's just a matter of Golden Boy being able to negotiate with the Thai promoter or the Japanese promoter. And I'm not sure which promoter represents the Sioko brothers. So I'm not sure currently about that or what their obligations are. But when you look right now, Yude Shigeoko is considered the Ring Magazine's number 1 fighter, with Oscar Collazo number 2, Melvin Jerusalem, who's a contender. Collazo already beat him at number 3. Panya Padispi, a guy that Sioko beat for his title. Hans Bodumzadov, who is a very highly ranked Uzbekistani fighter, gold medal Olympian, and obviously a guy who is mandated, I think, number 1 by the IBF. South African fighter I'm unfamiliar with at number 7. Pedro Tandurin at number 8. A Chinese fighter, Dianjing Zhu, number 9. Alex Winwood at number 10. It's funny that yeah. So that's the possibilities there as far as who these guys have in front of him. Jinjiro Shigeoka, the IBF world champion, has Pedro Tandurin potentially as his number 1 mandatory. and it does look like that fight will be mandated, since usually they have their number one opponent empty, and then the number 2 or 3 is usually where they have fighters. But in this case, number 2 is empty, but Pedro Tanduran is number 1. For our WBA champion, CP Freshmart, his number 1 mandatory position is vacant, and Hans-Boy Doomsdorf is ranked number 2. That would be a great fight. It'd be great to see Hans-Boy get an opportunity. He's not young. He's been an amateur fighter for a long time. He's been in several Olympic Games, and I think he's been a gold medal winner in 2 of them. So for him to finally get a world title fight would be great. It's something obviously he deserves at this point of his career. Right now, what's his record? Currently, he is 6-0 with 5 KOs. And as I said, he's 30 years old. So, if he got an opportunity now, that would be great, as opposed to wasting more time. As far as Yudai Shigyoko, he has Luis Castillo as his number 1 mandatory opponent, and I'm not sure how fast any of these mandatories are going to happen. Anybody who may have heard could leave in the comments below any specifics to these situations that I'm unfamiliar with at the current situation. And now we get to, obviously, Jaime Munguia. And the biggest controversy really around Munguia, which is kind of ridiculous, you have some guys on YouTube who are all based on race. Everything with them is racial. They don't want to give Munguia credit because he hasn't stepped up. But yet at the same time, they don't want him to fight Canelo Alvarez because he doesn't deserve a Canelo Alvarez fight. So you want him to step up, but you only want him to step up against the fighter you deem appropriate, right? So him stepping up and facing the undisputed pound-for-pound fighter in Canelo Alvarez, that's unfair because he doesn't deserve that opportunity, unlike somebody else. But then you want him to step up, right? Like, you can't make this shit up. If he fights Canelo Alvarez next, that's the biggest step up he could do. There's no other step up bigger than that at 168 pounds. So he'd be checking off the step up sort of check mark. He's done what you want him to do, even if that's not the fighter you hope to have him fight, because you would prefer he fights another fighter and gets beat in the process and gets exposed so you could mock and ridicule him. Because truthfully, we know that's what it's more about. It's not about being a boxing fan wanting to make the best fights. Because if your rationale was, we don't want Munguia to get that fight now because we want David Benavidez to get that fight, he deserves it, people would be like, yeah, I agree with you completely. That's fair. I also want David Benavidez to get that Canelo Alvarez fight before Jaime Munguia does. The rationale is, since Canelo did sign a 3-fight deal with the PBC and Al Haymon, it's unlikely he's going to get a Jaime Munguia fight next anyway, because Jaime Munguia is part of DAZN and Golden Boy. So that would probably be his comeback fight when he finishes his 3-fight deal with the PBC, to then go back to DAZN and Matchroom and then take on Jaime Munguia at that point, which would be a very significant fight and a big fight. And obviously in the meantime, Jaime Munguia is probably going to be fighting somebody else to stay busy to build up towards that fight as well as Canelo Alvarez, who still has 2 more fights under Al Haymon and the PBC. There is talk or speculation that Canelo is going to be fighting Charlo. And well, that's not the fight I would love to see. I would have preferred to see Charlo fight Plant, right? Plant's coming off of a loss. Obviously, Charlo is coming off of a win after being inactive, moving to a new division. Plant slapped Charlo in the head, right, at an event. So there's a lot of backstory, right, a lot of drama attached to it. So that would be a great fight. Like, if I could design things the way I want them designed, regardless of platform, what I would want is I would want Charlo versus Plant. And I'd want Canelo probably versus Benavidez, right? You put Benavidez and Canelo in the ring right now, if the fight is that good, is that competitive, then you still have one more fight under contract for them to do a rematch in September. And that would be the perfect sort of storm, right? That would be the perfect scenario as far as Canelo getting in and getting out, getting his money, getting 3 big fights, and then having the possibility of then being a free agent once more. If he couldn't get a Benavidez fight in May, because maybe Al Haymon doesn't want to risk him losing at that point, even though every fight is a risk, right? When you're taking on high-level opponents, you never know how things are going to work out. Then you get to a situation that is like, well, then who, right? Who do you want him to fight then? Because either you're going to fight the best fighter who earned the opportunity and deserves to fight, like Benavidez, or it's going to be a scenario where whoever you fight is going to be too dangerous for not enough pay, or not somebody fans really want to see Canelo Alvarez fight at this time because they're looking forward to the Benavidez fight, right? So they're not going to be satisfied with anything else. There's the possibility, of course, of the Bud Crawford fight, but I'm pretty set that Crawford and Spence too is going to happen, even though we've seen so much this and so much of that, talking about the fact that Spence is retiring because of his eye, Crawford saying, good riddance, happy that, you're retiring, thanks, good luck in the future, right? People talked about how he'd offered Boots Ennis a fight, and there was talk about him fighting Tim Tszyu, which for me would have been the most likely fight. If you wanted to talk about this PBC card, the first card on PBC Amazon, for me, Bud Crawford versus Tim Tszyu on pay-per-view would have made the most sense. Crawford's coming off of a career-defining fight, a career-defining victory. This would be him trying to become a 4-weight world champion. He is the WBO champion, so it would be a world title fight because he would be elevated into that mandatory position by the WBO. So that fight would make tons of sense, tons. But because that fight's not happening, that's one other indication that Spence Crawford is going to happen. So Crawford's going to be waiting around until Spence's eye and everything is back to normal. So look for that fight to happen sometime in fucking September or August of 2024, I reckon. So then who can you have Canelo Alvarez fight? And I guess if that's what you're going to say, that Crawford's not available, maybe Benavidez fight is too soon, considering there's a 3-fight deal, and they might not want to risk Canelo getting beat in the second fight, and then what do you do for the third fight, right? It's far easier to do what people have talked about, having Benavidez as the final fight, and then Canelo having the option to sign for a 4th fight if they do need to do a rematch at that case. And at that case, he's free to not sign a rematch clause or not sign a 4th fight option. But at the same time, he also could sign a 4th fight option under the PBC. So that would seem the most logical way for Canelo to move. So then that's why people talked about Jaime Munguia. If he came off of a very impressive victory against John Ryder, bam, slap him into that position for May. That fight would make tons of sense. Yeah, it would. But the problem is, do you see Al Haymon in the PBC working with fighters and promoters outside the PBC to make a Canelo Alvarez fight? They got Canelo. They don't need to work with other promoters to make a big fight. Canelo is a big fight. So why would you want to bring someone else in to divvy up part of that when you don't need to? So that's why I do think Charlo probably is going to be the next fight for Canelo, and I have no problem with it, truthfully. I explained to you how I would prefer things to pan out, but at the same time, if this is part of a 3-fight deal, kind of like when Andre Ward signed to fight Kovalev, he had 2 cherry pick fights, and then he had the Kovalev fight. If Canelo's getting the 2 Charlos, 2 bucket list fights that people have been asking for forever, boom, check that off, boom, check that off, I did it, so fuck off, leave me alone. And then he fights David Benavidez as the final fight in the contract. That makes a ton of sense. He still has an option for a 4th fight if they need to do a rematch. If not, He can then go and sign with the Zone, Matchroom, and potentially take on Jaime Munguia in his first fight with Matchroom on pay-per-view. That shit would be dynamite. And potentially they might be able to do that in Saudi Arabia, where Matchroom and everybody don't even have to pay for the bill. Because you know the Saudis, I mean, Canelo's already been there, glad-handing people, meeting people in Dubai. So he has connections already. Obviously, they would love to have the face of boxing be a part of their events in an all-Mexican bloodbath, Jaime Munguia versus Canelo Alvarez. That fight would make tons of sense financially. It would be a big fight at that time. So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, so if that's what's happening with Canelo Alvarez, what can we expect from Jaime Munguia? I was watching Black and Brown's channel today. If you're not subscribed, go check him out. And a lot of people were bantering back and forth. A lot of people, man, can't have a civil fucking discussion, right? People really can't have a civil discussion. I'm happy to have subscribers come to my channel, come to my lives, participate, please. I have no problem with anyone coming in, but keep it civil, right? People can disagree, have different opinions, but I don't understand all the hostility I saw from some people. If you're a Canelo fan, you're a Canelo fan. If you're a Canelo hater and a David Benavidez fan, then you're a Canelo hater and a David Benavidez fan. It's okay that you favor Benavidez and it's okay that you favor Canelo. The reality of the situation is hopefully that fight is going to get done this year and then all speculation is done. We will know who's better. And then, you know, we don't need any of this hostility and this discrediting of one fighter over another. David Benavidez has came off a fantastic 2023 where he was potentially fighter of the year, beating obviously Caleb Plant and Demetrius Andrade in two dominant performances. What else do you want from him? That's exactly what we've been asking him to do for years now, and he did it, and did it in fantastic fashion. So hats off to David Benavidez. For Canelo Alvarez, he signed a 3-fight deal with the PBC, showing you that he's interested in making the fights boxing fans want. And so the door is open for the David Benavidez fight. So I assume, like most people do, that that fight is going to be part of the contract. If he doesn't fight him, then we can start talking about duck and everything else. And I agree with you completely. As far as Jaime Munguia, let's check this shit out. What can we expect from Jaime Munguia now that he made this big statement at 168 pounds? Obviously, this division is the money division in boxing right now. When we look at BoxRec rankings, this is BoxRec rankings. Currently, Canelo Alvarez is number 1, the Ring Magazine champion. David Benavidez is number 2. Jaime Munguia currently is number 3. He just beat John Ryder, who they had at number 4. Christian Mbila is number 5. Sergey Derevchenko number 6. So Munguia beat 2 fighters ranked on BoxRec's top 10. That's better than, well, I would say it's similar to David Benavidez, who beat Plant and Andrade. Plant is number 7. Andrade is number 8. Morrell's number 9. He definitely should be ranked higher. Vladimir Shishkin is number 10. Osley Iglesias, the Cuban fighter, is 11. Beck Malacuzzi of 12. Edgar Berlanga, number 13. Diego Pacheca, number 14. Eric Bazinian, the Canadian-Russian fighter, number 15. So that top 15 has a lot of great potential opponents, right? Obviously, we know Munguia and his team would prefer to get that Canelo Alvarez big money fight as soon as possible. But if that's not available to them, then what fight makes a lot of sense? And this is where I come in with my perspective once more. That you put Jaime Munguia, the number 3 ranked fighter, in with the number 13th ranked fighter, Edgar Berlanga. Mexico versus Puerto Rico in June on the Puerto Rican holiday, right? New York City, Madison Square Gardens. Headliner, Munguia Berlanga. Undercard fight, Calazo versus his mandatory, another Mexican fighter. That shit becomes fucking a great card. Mexico versus Puerto Rico in New York City. I don't know, as a boxing fan, how you wouldn't be excited about that fight. You may not like Berlanga, and you may not like Munguia. They might not look like you, they might not sound like you, they may not have anything to do with you. But the reality is, it's still a great matchup between two really good fighters. Whether you think they're the best fighters in the division, that's irrelevant. What's relevant is these are two undefeated fighters, two very aggressive guys, and you throw them matched up against each other on the biggest Puerto Rican holiday in New York City. Man, that shit's fire. It's can't miss. That literally, as a promoter, is what I would be gaming for right now. Right now, Edgar Berlanga is 21-0, obviously 16 KOs. This is a guy who has been exposed a little bit, but he's still young, only 26 years of age, right? He is 6'1" with a 73-inch reach, so he's a little taller than Munguia, and I think a little longer. Obviously, he's a New Yorker, so that whole Puerto Rico-Mexico thing, right? Maybe you would feel like he's getting the A-side treatment, having it in his backyard. But, come on. Let's be fair. The money comes from events. This is an event. He's going to be fighting, I don't know how you say these Irish guys' names. Padraig McCrory, who is 18-0 with 9 knockouts. Very good amateur fighter. As an amateur, what was his record? 14-10, but that's BoxRec rankings. I don't know how official those are because we know lots of fights aren't listed on BoxRec. He is the Hammer, 35 years old, Orthodox Irish fighter, 6'1", from Northern Ireland. This is a fight that Berlanga should win, right? He's fighting a good fighter, but a guy without much power. When you look at the kind of caliber of opponent that he's been fighting, he hasn't been facing anybody like Berlanga. So, while it might be an entertaining fight early on, don't be surprised if Berlanga ends up sparking his ass out, right? And that would be fantastic. Because I don't know anyone as a boxing fan that wouldn't be excited about that possibility. Both guys are obviously DAZN fighters. It's a fight that makes tons of sense. And if it makes money, it makes sense. And if it makes sense, it probably makes money. Some people were talking about a fight between Munguia and number 5 ranked Christian Mbila, who's just coming off of a great victory in his last fight. But the problem with Christian Mbila is that fight's not as marketable. You don't have the connection to draw big crowds. He's a Frenchman who fights out of Canada. There's no built-in rivalry between him and Munguia. He's an exciting fighter, but he's also a fighter that's relatively unknown, right? Him against a guy like Caleb Plant, that would make more sense. If he was able to beat a guy like Caleb Plant, an ex-world champion, then that fight would make a huge statement. It would obviously give him a lot of attention and help build him up to a position where now he is a real viable opponent for the top guys at 168 pounds. And for Caleb Plant, if he was to beat a guy like Christian Mbila, an aggressive come-forward fighter, strong, aggressive, hard puncher, that would be a statement, right? That would tell you right there that he is one of the top 3 fighters in the division, right? Definitely edging Morrell. You would have Canelo, David, and Plant right there. And obviously Plant would be back in position for big money fights and potential world title fights. So that would be the kind of fight that might make sense for him. Another fight that people have been asking for, and this is a French-on-French fight. Obviously, there's a rivalry there, but that fight would probably have to be done in France, right? And that would be Christian Mbila versus the hard-punching fighter Kevin Sadio. Sorry if I butchered his name. Sadio. A mean mugger who is 21-0 with 19 knockouts. Big, aggressive, hard puncher, just like his countrymen. He's 33 years old, 5'8", 68-inch reach, a Mike Tyson-esque type of opponent. That fight just sounds like it would be a fucking war. A war. Maybe they could do that fight in Saudi Arabia if they're looking for a good, exciting undercard fight as well, right? Like that fight would be fire, dynamite. And that's a fight that makes tons of sense. Outside of that, I think that's probably the most natural direction for Jaime Munguia to move. If he's not going to fight a guy like that, then I wouldn't be surprised if he was fighting a guy like, say, Jack Cullen, right? And I know people won't be excited. They will say this is a step backwards. This is the same kind of fighter he always fights. But if they're trying to build you up for a potential fight with Canelo Alvarez when he crosses back over to Matchroom and DAZN, Jack Cullen is the perfect opponent. Jack Cullen, 22-5-1. He's a guy that's been knocked out 4 times, doesn't have much power, and he's coming off of a victory in his last fight, literally this weekend. Oh, I'm wrong. Jack Cullen lost that fight. I thought he won. You bum. You got beat by that guy. Jack Chelly. I didn't even notice that. Oh, this guy beat him. So maybe that's the fight to make then. This other UK fighter, 26 years of age, who just beat Cullen. Or potentially Mark Jeffers. Mark Jeffers, who is ranked right up there, 17-0, 4 knockouts. Nobody likes a redhead, so people would love to see him get smashed. Only 4 knockout wins, so he's not a power puncher, 25 years of age. A guy who's coming off of good wins. That's why he's ranked high. As far as a domestic level UK fighter, it's not a fight that would get a lot of people's attention, I don't think. But at the same time, think about who else we could have Jaime Munguia fight. You have to go down to probably Vladimir Shishkin, right? A good Russian fighter, good amateur pedigree. Or Iglesias, a good Cuban fighter, good amateur pedigree. Bekmambetov, which is a DAZN fighter and potentially would be a fucking great fight. Bekmambetov, 13-0 with 10 knockouts, stopped once by Gabriel Rosado. We saw Gabriel Rosado's fight with Jaime Munguia. That was a great fight as well. So, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, this fight makes tons of sense. Malakuziev is 27 years old. He's not too small, so it would be a fight that makes sense. He's coming off of 6 victories since his loss to Gabe Rosado. So that would be another fight that I would be very intrigued by. If you can't get a Gabe Rosado, you go fight Bekmambetov, right? That shit would be dynamite. Bekmambetov is a hard puncher and aggressive come-forward fighter. Jaime Munguia is a guy who can fight that way, but shows that he can also use his legs, use his jab, control the distance a little bit. He's shown that he's a little bit more versatile than the average Mexican fighter, right? And people may not give him credit for that, but it's true. He's proven it. Another fighter that potentially would be dynamite, and I think he's a DAZN fighter as well. I don't know the likelihood of this because it may be high risk, low reward, but then people may feel Bekmambetov is similar. But that is Diego Pacheco, who is a dynamite fighter. One of the guys I've been most impressed with, really. I mean, when you think about his record, 20-0, 17 knockouts. The kid's very tall, 6'4", with a 79-inch reach. He's difficult for anyone. He's going to have a reach advantage over everybody. And unlike the 54-pound fighter, Funduro, he's a much more skilled fighter. A guy that's able to use his height and reach advantage a lot better, lead guys into his shots, not always have to be like inside throwing hands like a Figueroa. He's a guy that can actually change range, change levels, and is a pretty fucking dynamite fighter. And I probably would pick him to beat Jaime Munguia. in all honesty. I think he's a better fighter than Jaime Munguia. I think he's a better fighter than Edgar Berlanga. I think he's a better fighter than Bekmel Kuziev. So whoever gets unfortunate enough to have to fight him, I feel sorry for them because they're probably going to lose. Right? That's just what I think. You may disagree. Feel free to leave it in the comment section below. But that would also be a great opponent for Jaime Munguia. When you think about Berlanga, Bekmel Kuziev, or this guy, Diego Pacheco, fucking dynamite. Diego Pacheco has a fight scheduled. When is it? In April 6th, against Sean McCalman, who is 15-0. I've never heard of him. McCalman, 15 wins, 7 KOs, American fighter out of Colorado, so he must be garbage. He is a former MMA fighter, so that's his background. So maybe that's why we're unfamiliar with him. He got a win over Money Powell, which doesn't mean much because Money Powell is a Dante Boxing Nation hype job who's been exposed a long, long time ago. And now stepping in to face Diego Pacheco, that dude's going to get fucking destroyed. Destroyed. That's all you can say. That dude is going to get fucking destroyed. Outside of that, you have, as I mentioned, the Canadian fighter Eric Bazinian, Mark Jeffers, Pavel Silyagin, Yevgeny Shevchenko, right? You know, there's quite a few opponents that he could fight, but what opponents can he fight that would make you excited? What opponents could he fight that would be the perfect sort of scenario to build up towards a Canelo Alvarez fight? Because he takes on one of these guys, maybe then a lower level, stay busy guy afterwards or in between. And then he's right on par as far as being lined up for a potential Canelo Alvarez fight early or late 2024. Maybe you could even do that fight at the end of 2024. We know Canelo Alvarez doesn't mind fighting 3 times a year. If he fights in May and then September, maybe he'll be interested in getting back out there in November or December, depending on how tough those fights were. I expect that they would be tough, so I would expect him to probably get back in 2025 and cross over to the zone to take on Jaime Munguia for what could only be described as an outstanding fight. If the fight happens next, I won't hate on it, but I really don't see Al Haymon and the PBC working with other promoters. I mean, we know that Oscar De La Hoya today, during the whole presentation and the whole build-up for Munguia and post-fight, he talked about how he would like to work with Al Haymon, meaning that he would like to work with Al Haymon to make a Canelo Alvarez-Jaime Munguia fight. But then again, I find it unlikely. But let me know in the comment section below, what do you think? What's the likelihood of Munguia fighting Canelo on the PBC? And if he doesn't fight him, then who would you like to see him fight next? I gave you a few potential opponents. Let me know in the comment section below which of these guys you prefer. And as far as Oscar Collazo, what's going to happen to him? If he defends his title 5 times, and I don't know if he meant 5 times in 1 year. It's January, so in the lower weight divisions, theoretically, you could defend your title 5 times, right? Because you could easily fight lower level opposition, and people aren't really going to give you too much slack because it's the lower weight division. So you could get away with a lot just because people aren't so familiar with it. We think about the guys now currently ranked at that division. And think about what we could see him do. We know he called out the other champions, but say he fights a guy like Luis Castillo sometime soon, and then gets a unification fight. So you fight, say, in May against Castillo, or sorry, June against Castillo on that Puerto Rican day. That might be too late for him to fight then. Maybe you'll do a fight in between against somebody else in the meantime, a lower level fighter, right? Like maybe an Alex Winwood, the Australian fighter. You fight him, and then you fight Luis Castillo for that June date, and then you still have the rest of the year to get 2 more title defenses on before the end of the year. So what did Golden Boy say? That he would give him a $500,000 bonus if he does what he did and defends his titles 5 times in 1 year, like he did back in the day. I hope he does it. I would love to see Oscar De La Hoya pay him $500,000. That would be a great little bonus check. And plus, you fight 5 times this year, you're going to make good money because you're fighting 5 times. So, right, inevitably, you're going to get paid pretty consistent to what you got paid today. Obviously, if you step up and take on one of the other champions, you expect to get paid a little more premium price, depending. So, yeah, let me know what you think about this fight card this weekend and about what direction you'd like to see these guys go next. Obviously, we got the lightweight, minimum weight world champion, Oscar Collazo, and we have ex-former WBA, 154-pound champion Jaime Munguia, and we're projecting about what we'd like to see them do in 2024 moving forward. Leave it in the comment section below. Thanks for watching. Peace out. Enjoy what's left of your weekend. My weekend is done, so I'm going to enjoy this beer, chillax. I'm trying in the process of cleaning my kitchen, which has wall cancer because of water damage. So I'm trying to fix that, so wish me luck. I am not a DIY type of guy. I prefer to pay somebody else to do it, but you know. It's not my house. I rent it, so I'm going to go with the cheapest cost available. If it works, congratulations. If it doesn't, whatever. I tried. But leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Peace out. Enjoy yourself.